Instead of hanging out in places like this, a lot of us are spending more and more time online. We're buying stuff and we're doing a lot of business in cyberspace, and scammers are cashing in.
Well, Australia's major banks are warning us all to be extra vigilant right now.
Scammers are using mobile banking apps.
This is actually totally fake.
Oh no.
Scammers stole about $850 million from Australian victims last year, and more than a third of that was lost through fake investment opportunities. Cyber criminals are even posing as employees of the big banks and major financial institutions, and they're getting really good at it.
Technology is not what makes these things clever. The technology allows you to hide your identity and hide your traces. It's the psychology that makes them clever.
One of the trends we've seen in 2021 is scammers posing as major investment firms and major entities.
We're going to meet someone who was tricked into handing over his life savings, and we're going to show you how to make sure you don't get scammed the same way yourself.
Hi, I'm Tony Papagiannopoulos. I live in Melbourne and I work in IT for many years, and now I'm a business owner.
Tony lost a couple of $100,000 in March this year and probably doesn't fit the profile of who you'd imagine would be a typical victim. Tony runs his own business. He used to work in IT, and all he wanted to do was move his savings from a term deposit to investing in bonds.
I was hoping to transfer some money across to another investment which might give me a little bit of a better benefit. I didn't know much about the bonds, so I was into the process of learning and wanted to talk to some advisors to tell them exactly what are the pros and cons with this.
Here's how cyber scammers tricked Tony. First, he searched for Australian bonds investment to find comparison sites. Tony looked at the top 3 ad results that Google returned. Each of them had what looked like a real domain name.
The links that he got returned in the search all took him to malicious comparison sites that directed him to a scammer.
Then Tony filled in his contact details in all 3 of the websites.
It's very effective because you think you're doing the work. It's not someone contacting you out of the blue, you're contacting someone.
So the next morning, Tony gets a phone call from a woman calling herself Jane Weaver. She said she'd put him through to her colleague and that they were both working for the big financial firm JP Morgan.
He certainly knew his stuff. He certainly knew how bonds are working.
They've got all of the technical jargon. They speak like somebody who's an expert in investments as a general rule. And they usually have a hierarchy of people you could talk to. So if you start asking difficult questions, they'll say, look, I'll put you on to my manager because he's much better versed in that particular area than I am.
Just after 7 o'clock that evening, Tony received an email from Jane Weaver.
Thank you for your time today. Attached prospectus. Email body has fixed rates. Offer available until March 31st. Details of how the bonds are protected.
The emails that I got from Andrew Duncan was extremely legit. It was coming from a jpmorganbonds.com domain name. I couldn't fault him.
At the moment, we're seeing them imitate legitimate investment companies, and they will do a perfect replica of the prospectuses of those companies, simply changing the contact details. They are very difficult to pick.
Just to be sure, Tony then rang up the JP Morgan head office in the UK just to double check it was a legitimate deal. They told him to call Australia, so he did. But he says when he tried to ring the head office in Sydney, he couldn't get through.
I couldn't get a connection with this particular phone number in Sydney, so I rang the number that Andrew Duncan gave me. The PABX system was extremely professional. It sounded exactly the same as the one in England. I did question him and I said, look, is this your new number? And he's obviously agreed and said, yes, that's our new connection.
For its part, JP Morgan says it's not aware of any phone outages during that period. So the people who were posing as JP Morgan employees started asking for all the normal things banks might ask for if you're setting up an account, like your ID and some sort of proof of your residential address. Tony thought he was dealing with a legitimate financial company, so he uploaded his documents.
I'm telling you, I was very sure I was speaking to JP Morgan at the time. I got tricked very well.
Tony says he continued talking to Andrew Duncan, whom he understood would be managing his investments. Not long after he handed over copies of his ID, Jane Weaver was in touch again.
I am pleased to inform you that the Compliance Department has now signed off your documentation. Please see attached the banking coordinates for our regulated JP Morgan client holding account. This is held with the Westpac, one of Australia's largest authorised deposit-taking institution.
Here's when Tony transfers 100 grand so Andrew Duncan can invest it for him.
He sent me a proper form with all the details, and it was a Westpac account that I had to transfer the money to.
A few days later, Tony sent his second deposit of another 100 grand. So we need to stop for a minute because just after Tony transferred that second deposit of 100 grand, his wife received a phone call, and that's when the penny dropped. Tony had given the scammers his wife's number. They called her phone to offer her a similar investment deal. But a warning flashed up telling her the number was potentially fraudulent. The woman on the other end of the line was Jane Weaver.
That's where I kind of backtracked everything. I searched on the phone number a little bit more.
During his Google search, Tony found the number linked to a scam in 2016.
And I thought, right, okay, this is definitely an issue.
He contacted his bank straight away to stop the transactions, but says nobody could tell him what was going on.
There was absolutely no one that you can talk to get a handle on what the situation is.
Tony got on the phone and then even went to his local bank branch. Weeks later, Tony suddenly received some of his money back in 2 separate deposits. The banks had managed to put a stop to the second transfer of 100 grand and then traced another $14,000.
The worst part for me was that obviously I've lost a fairly large amount of money. I should have known better.
The banks involved were Westpac and Citibank. Tony blames them both. He says banks shouldn't be letting cybercriminals set up legitimate bank accounts, and he says it's too easy for consumers to transfer money to a scammer's account.
It's the banking organisation that have allowed them to be coming into their systems so easily, and not allowing us to feeling safe.
For a number of years now, the ACCC has been calling on Australian banks to follow UK leads and to actually look at whether or not the account names match, as well as the BSP and account numbers.
Citibank says it acted swiftly to get as much money back as it could. The bank says it's committed to responding urgently when advised of a scam, and it acted immediately for Tony, helping him to recover the majority of his funds. Citi also says it apologises if Tony was dissatisfied with its communication, and that its local head of fraud remained in touch to keep him informed as it tracked down his money. Westpac says it can't comment on the case for privacy reasons, but the bank says there has been a reported rise in scam activity and that it encourages all Australians to be vigilant. Westpac also says it invests heavily in scam prevention and it has robust processes in place to alert and protect customers. JP Morgan says it's sorry to hear Tony was targeted by this sophisticated scam. It became aware of scammers in April and notified the financial markets regulator, ASIC, as well as publishing an alert on its website.
The scammers had to set up some fake websites at about $12 each. That lasts for a year. They had to set up a fake email. That's free for the first 2 months and $1 or so a month after that. They had to get a fake phone number. They had to somehow redirect a number in Australia. That costs about 85 cents a month, about $1 a month, say. So all up for less than $50, this thing could be built and deployed and run for a year.
So the scam is really cheap to set up. Then all the cyber criminals need to do is to trick you into thinking it's a limited offer.
Attackers also try and get you into a hot state, so they try and make you think you're in a rush and you can't think straight.
Google says it works hard to identify fraudulent websites.
My main advice would be, before you transfer anyone any money on the internet for any reason, show someone else what you're doing. Talk to someone else. Pause, talk to someone else and come back to it. That little break and another pair of eyes can stop you losing your life savings.
They also suggest meeting the person or visiting their office before you send any money, and take your time with any big investment decision. And they recommend talking to your bank before you make any major transaction, because they can help you do some extra checks.
If you're new to investing, I really recommend people go to moneysmart.gov.au to find out just the basics of how to protect yourself. And on that site, they also have a companies not to deal with list, which are known scam investment companies.
Now, it's not very often that scam stories have a good outcome, but almost 3 months after Tony transferred that money to the scammers, Westpac and Citibank told him they'd managed to get pretty much all of it back. Just $2,000 is still missing.
I'm still pinching myself, to tell you the truth. Very happy because 99% was returned.
We still don't know exactly how Tony's money was recovered, but both Westpac and Citibank say they worked hard on the case. Tony still wants answers and changes to the banking system.
If you ask me today about why, if I'm upset, I'll say yes, I'm still upset, but not towards the scammers. Because they didn't have all the tools by themselves to get to me. Somebody else has helped them to get to me in many ways. And these are the tools that we need to fix so they can't do that work anymore.